The next submission is an oral presentation from Dr. Luxat as outlined in CMD 15H 2.133 and 2.133A. Dr. Luxat, the floor is yours.
It is now afternoon, so good afternoon, Mr. President and members of the Commission. It's my pleasure to be here and discuss some issues around nuclear safety. I should, for the record, say that my name is John Luxat. I am a professor of nuclear engineering at McMaster University, and in addition, I hold the research chair in nuclear safety analysis. And most of my work throughout my career has been in the area of nuclear safety. So what I would like to do today is basically do or present what I believe I was asked to do as an intervener, to review the CMD documents prepared by Bruce Power and the CNSC staff and comment on those documents and the conclusions therefore. My review is going to focus broadly on nuclear safety, and in particular it's informed by insights from research that I've been engaging in the last number of years into high consequence industrial events and accidents and some selected natural disasters that have occurred, looking for some commonalities between these events and accidents and nuclear accidents. And it was interesting, the source of this material is lessons learned. And all of these events, I'm not going to go through them in detail, they're in the written submission, but they range from oil transportation of different land and sea, oil production, Deepwater Horizon, aerospace, Challenger and Columbia, malevolent acts, in particular 9/11, and then natural disasters. And the interesting thing about the natural disasters is that the consequence of natural disasters are not just solely due to the magnitude of the disaster, but they tend to be compounded by man-made elements. And if we look at in the nuclear accidents, the 3 Mile Island, Chernobyl, and Fukushima, and there are many lessons learned reports on those. And similarly on the other events, every time something happens and people lose their lives, companies lose a lot of money as an economic consequence of the event, there's always at least 1 or 2, sometimes 3 lessons learned reports, and they focus on why it happened and what were the elements that compounded the severity of the event. So interestingly, the factors compounding consequences of accidents cover things such as design deficiencies, procedural non-compliance, people not following procedures, inadequate training, so they don't perform the procedures adequately. Important one, which relates to natural disasters, is inadequate emergency preparedness. And I'll just point out that the Hurricane Katrina and Hurricane Sandy are 2 very stark examples. Sandy was bigger than Katrina, but the US FEMA did not get the emergency response resources pre-positioned. They only brought them in after the event, whereas in Sandy, they were pre-positioned and were able to take control of the event. And as a result, a lot less lives lost and less economic consequences. The The big one, which is important in, I think, in the context of nuclear safety, as in these other events, especially engineered systems, is what I call institutional failure, where the institutions, be it the operator or the regulator, don't do what they should be doing. So it's reflected in poor safety culture. This was something which came through in just about every one of the man-made acts, events that I have listed. Poor safety culture was a main, very large contributor. Things such as acceptance of deficiencies, decision-making focused on mission imperatives, that came up in particular in the Challenger and the Columbia space disasters. Poor communication between various groups within an organization or with external stakeholders. This came up again in the effectiveness of emergency preparedness and emergency response. And then inadequate regulation, either internal and external. And obviously Fukushima is one significant example, but it appears in a number of other regulated industries. Oil and gas, which is not that well regulated. So how do we deal with this? To try and bring all of this together, I employed the defense in depth concept, and this is a construct, five-level construct from the IAEA, and the first three deal with basically the design basis, and 4 and 5, are going into the beyond design basis. And I use that as a means to assess overall nuclear safety that is being documented in the Bruce Power documentation and in the CNSE staff documentation. So I focused on just 4 of the selected safety and control areas because these are ones I felt were important for overall safety. And in the first one, management system, there they have performance assessment, improvements in management review, operating experience, change management, safety culture, configuration management. These are all elements that are important, and the importance of the management system and the processes, the roles and responsibilities that have been defined within the management system is that these affect all 5 levels of defense in depth. It's not just operating, it's handling accidents. Or do people know what they're meant to be doing? Are they trained? Without an overall management system to guide the organization, you will end up with having deficiencies which could have direct impact on the consequences. Safety culture is an important one too, because sometimes safety culture is considered to be an exhortation, where you put up a nice chart on the wall and say, here's your 10 elements of safety culture, and then you say, okay, well, you expect people to read it as they come in and out from work, and it becomes part of the wallpaper. But to have good safety culture, it has to be built in to the organization on a day-to-day basis. So safety has to come first in the overall decision making. Also, in terms of things such as use of OPEX, and this is where Bruce Power has, I think, been innovative in terms of the nuclear safety culture monitoring panels that they've established, which are part of taking a pulse of the organization in terms of safety culture, and use of external best practices such as the INPO and WANO material and the NEI document, NEI 0907, which is mentioned in the submission. So the next one is human performance management, and this obviously is, again, covers all levels of 5 levels. And the big thing that comes out here, and this, in these tables, when I say implemented, means these are things that I have taken from the material that's in the Bruce Power submission. And staff training and certification is clearly a high priority, which one would expect it to be. But the other smaller items which indicate that it's not a static process is that Bruce Power does have its staff involved in CSA standards development activities, in international meetings at the IAEA, taking part in technical committee activities, which opens up the view to other, in particular the IAEA, a lot of international participants there. And similarly, and we've heard on Monday evening about the emergency response, in particular the coordination of communication, which is a very important aspect. It's one that if it breaks down, it's hard to recover it on the fly. So you have to have it available, you have to exercise it, exercise it, and I believe Bruce Power has done and is continuing to do a very good job there, as have they done on the initial emergency response training exercises post-Fukushima, the Huron challenge, we heard about that. Operating performance, this is where I would just point out that safety is not just in doing a calculation or safety analysis, and we'll get into that shortly, but it's in order to actually achieve safety, safe operation, you have to operate safely. No matter how many 10 to the minus X you come up with in terms of numbers, if the organization doesn't operate safely, it's not going to, having a good risk assessment isn't going to save the day. And that was, just as a matter of interest, was what happened to BP. BP was known in the oil and gas industry as having the best risk assessment in the oil and gas industry, but they had a lousy safety culture. So you got the Texas City oil refinery disaster, you got the Deepwater Horizon, and all of these basically, they never learned the lessons from the Texas oil refinery, seems to have ignored it, and they had accidents. They haven't had a very good record in terms of accidents. So safe operation and safety culture is very important. I'm not going to read through all of the line by line. I'm sure I've just summarized some of the means, but one thing I would point out, because it has come up, is the transportable emergency measures equipment with dedicated fast cooling and water and electrical power connection capability. I don't believe that that is something that should be dismissed. That is a physical change which is followed up from the Fukushima action items, and is one, if they'd had that capability in Fukushima Daiichi in time, and the equipment that they were relying on, which was from surrounding municipalities, a lot of it was washed away by the tsunami, then I believe would have had a different outcome. It would have been closer to the outcome in Fukushima Daiichi, the neighboring 4-unit station, which didn't suffer the same impact of the tsunami. Emergency Management Center is a very important upgrade, and the use of incident management system is also very important, because that is what the security and military forces use as a structure around managing an incident. In addition, there was the mention of this software, which is to basically exercise a simulation of emergency response, and takes into account, as I understand it, the actual physical details of where equipment is located, and from that you can identify vulnerabilities to particular external events. So I see I have 1 minute left, so I'll try and wrap up. The last one is the safety control area safety analysis, which we've heard quite a bit of discussion. And they, Bruce Power, have been constantly updating safety analysis, deterministic as well as probabilistic, and that applies to certainly the first 3 levels of defense, but in addition at the levels 4, where they're going to be on design basis, there is, through the analysis, they have done initial quantification of risk reduction from the EME features, and there is severe accident analysis and severe accident analysis management guidelines. So overall, the role of risk, in my view, is risk, and risk is actually consequence times frequency, by the way, not just frequency, and that's important in terms of the previous discussion around that. The key thing, you don't use the PSA as an absolute measure of nuclear safety. Nuclear safety is a much more complex thing, involves people, processes, and culture, as well as the analysis. So it's part of it. It's important to use it for risk-informed decision-making, identify where you can improve things, add features, and some of the features have been added by Bruce Power, not just to reduce risk, but just because they make common sense. And I think that's a sign of a good operating organization. So overall, I don't want to belabor and use up more time than I have. I'll just state my conclusions. I believe that Bruce Power have demonstrated they have a comprehensive and sound management system. They have excellent human performance management at all levels in the organization. The operating performance supports a dominant nuclear safety focus. The safety analysis program is focused on supporting and improving nuclear safety. A commitment to supporting a staff professional development through involvement with, as I mentioned, with CSA standards development and international nuclear safety organizations. So it's not just going there for the sake of meeting people, but it's also part of staff development and capability development. They have enhanced, as I listed, a number, just about every level of defense in depth has been enhanced through actions that they have taken to address both organizational related issues. Important one was one which I learned when I was in Ontario Hydro. Clear definition of roles and responsibilities is an important component for a good, safe operating organization. And there are people and processes and procedures to support continuous safe operation of Bruce A and B nuclear generating stations. And I believe my conclusions are consistent with the independent oversight review by CNSC staff. And in final conclusion is that I would recommend that the CNSC should approve Bruce Power's application and allow Bruce Power to continue to contribute to safe, low-carbon emission electricity to Ontario. And on that note, I would just point out that I am much more concerned with the effects of climate change than I am with particular risk numbers. Climate change is something that will affect millions and billions of people around the world, potentially, and has the potential to have very large economic consequences. Thank you.
Thank you.